Continuing our look into the hidden goodies of Unity 3D, I'd like to cover some of the core classes that you might use or will have to use a lot to make a game in Unity 3D. Now, as you can see in a respawn script, we've already used transform.position.y. Now, a class is basically its own variable. You can define your own classes, but Unity already has a whole bunch of them that we'll use a lot. Now, for example, one of the classes is called a game object, and underneath the game object are the transform.position.y. So this is a member of basically the game object that you are attaching this script to. Now, there's a couple more things that extend your scripting ability in Unity as soon as you add its components. Let me show you what I mean. For example, the player here has a transform attached to it, which is default for every game object in the game. For example, when I click the floor, there's also a transform. Going back to our player, you can see that there's also a character controller attached to it. And the character controller functionality also adds a couple abilities that what we can do in script, because it adds the character controller class to our script. Now, if you have a script with character controller code in it and there's no character controller attached to the game object, your script will not work. However, as soon as you do add the core classes or components to your game object, your script is extended and you can use that as well. Now, to have a good overview of exactly what kind of core classes there are in Unity 3D, you can pull up the scripting manual. It's pretty easy. Just go to the help and then click scripting manual, and this will launch your default browser with the scripting manual attached to it. Now, notice that as soon as you do that, it opens up the scripting manual for the version of Unity that you have installed. If you, however, want to have the most updated version, you have to go to unity3d.com and find the documentation there. Now, on the left hand side, you can see a link, important classes, and when we click that, there is basically 5 classes that are very important in developing games with Unity 3D. Now, the first one we've already covered a lot, which are the global functions that are accessible in JavaScript or C#. When I click that, you can see the update function, the late update, and we've already covered a lot of these, although there's a lot more for very specific purposes. If I go back, it also talks about moving and rotating objects in 3D space. Now, this has a lot to do with basic 3D math, and we'll get into that a little later. Don't worry about the math part though. This is 3D and it's a lot more awesome than school. Then there's an animation system that is used for when you're importing assets that have animations. I've already covered rigid body, or at least some part of it, which adds physics to rigid bodies. But as soon as you click that, you can see that there's also a couple of functions that are added to your script that you can use, and other inherited variables. Then there's also the character controller, which I just talked about just now. And the character controller is basically what controls our character in 3D space. And it's also physics based, but not as realistic as rigid bodies. Now, as you can see, this also adds a couple of inherited variables and only 2 functions, the move and the simple move function. Now, these are the core classes in Unity 3D, and all these add variables or functionality to our script, and these are already optimized for us, so it is very extremely powerful to use these instead of trying to make your own. So we'll look at these later, and if you've been watching these videos all through one after another, then you might feel a little overwhelmed right now, but don't worry, we'll get to those shortly, and one at a time as we start crafting our game. One thing I have to show you, which is a little easier, is private versus public variables, and I'll show you that when you click on the next video.